Welcome back to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Noxon, your host. Joining me now on the phone is Mr. Mark Mix. He is the president of the National Right to Work Committee, and we're going to talk about some of the struggles you might expect to experience during this holiday shopping season. Mr. Mix, welcome to Talk of the Town.
Steve, good to be with you this morning. Thanks for the opportunity.
Always look forward to our conversation, sir. This is something that has been kind of brewing here for a couple of months, and now that we are into the holiday season, in the shopping season specifically, some of these shortages, some of these supply chain bottlenecks that people have been talking about are starting to be felt rather acutely by pretty much everyone at this point.
Yeah, Steve, and we're talking about it on the radio, but I'm talking about it at the kitchen table. My wife was trying to buy a pair of trousers for my son on the internet and said we couldn't get them until January 25th,
Jeez.
which is a little bit late for putting it under the Christmas tree. Now, my 21-year-old son still believes in Santa Claus, so we got to have it there, in the morning. You got to be there under the tree in the morning. So anyway,
just cut out the picture.
These are real problems, Steve, and they make a difference. And the supply chain, it's an issue that was kind of a hot public affairs issue where the White House started talking about it because people were talking about it. It's dissipated a little bit in the consciousness of the politicians, but certainly not in the minds of the consumers and you and me and my wife and my child with his pants. So it's a real issue, and there's lots of factors involved in it, and it probably is not going to get better between now and December 25th, certainly, and probably not going to get better from now until maybe the second quarter of next year.
My wife works as what's the word she works for a company where she manages the spare parts. Okay, it's a big company,
yeah.
So she deals with a lot of big manufacturers around the country. She does a lot of business to business stuff, and she and I've talked about this quite a bit. And what's happening too is not so much the business to consumer market is feeling the pinch and where the consumer's feeling this. It's also happening on the business to business side where you have manufacturers who can't manufacture because they can't get the parts to fix the machines. I mean, it's so we're talking about this second quarter, maybe third quarter before we start seeing some relief here.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And that raises another issue about, the reliability or our manufacturing reliance on parts and replacements and original equipment for our vehicles and for our machines, that we're relying on foreign countries for that. And that's why, when things go bad at the ports, things go bad for manufacturers like your wife, and being able to get things moving and, get pharmaceuticals here. And one of the questions there, and under the last 4 years of Trump, we were trying to basically onshore manufacturing again. And, of course, the White House is now talking about, onshoring semiconductor businesses and chip businesses. And interestingly enough, Steve, you won't be surprised, but basically they're putting together, a $56 billion package to incentivize chip manufacturers here in the country, because that's one of the big supply chain issues is in the automotive manufacturing that is now back onshore here in the United States. But creating an environment where businesses aren't leaving for Europe or Far East or Indonesia or wherever, they're coming back to the United States to manufacture. And when you raise energy prices, when you raise taxes, when you increase regulation, capital does move. And unfortunately, this supply chain issue has shown and exposed kind of the reliance on foreign manufacturers for American goods and American products and American manufacturing, and that's a problem too.
Well, and we've got a federal government that almost seems to be schizophrenic when it comes to dealing with this. I've talked about this with other people on the show. There are things they could be doing to resolve some of these issues. They just don't seem to want to. They, on one hand, like you say, are throwing a bunch of money into incentivizing these chip makers to open their manufacturing plants here in this country. But at the same time, they're talking about raising corporate tax rates and making it more expensive to do business in this country through minimum wage hikes and all these other bennies that they're forcing onto corporations. I mean, those two issues right there seem to be in conflict with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Schizophrenia is a good way to describe that, and it really is. I mean, it's almost like that everything else is mutually exclusive of everything else when they think about policy remedies. When they look at something, they say, okay, how do we solve that problem? Not understanding that the thing they did last week basically exacerbates the problem they're dealing with this week. And so you're right about that. And one of the things, like, for example, the chip story that came out yesterday or 2 days ago about subsidizing the semiconductor industry. You won't be surprised, Steve, that comes with dramatic incentives for union-only companies. I mean, they want to give it to those companies that basically have unionized workforces. So, for example, the electric vehicle subsidy. I mean, the largest manufacturer and seller of electric vehicles in the United States is Tesla, but they're not organized by the United Auto Workers Union, and so you don't get the $450 or $4,500 subsidy for buying a Tesla that you would get for buying a UAW-made union car. I mean, playing favorites, picking winners and losers, that's not good government policy, and it certainly exposes kind of their agenda and to your point, the schizophrenia of the agenda. If you're going to try to fix something, fix it. Don't segment it and say, oh, these people win and these people lose. And when it comes to union officials and their desire to get more workers forced to pay union dues as a condition of keeping a job, they are political benefactors of this administration. It doesn't help anybody, really, except for the top bosses of the unions here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting to watch this whole thing going down because, as I've said, there are things they can do, and they have done many, many things and attempted to do many, many things, even things that the courts had said they can't do. Yet when it comes to actually using the power of government to solve problems, for example, the issues out in California, much of those issues are being created by the regulations that the state of California has imposed upon the trucking industry, upon the shipping industries, upon the ports. And so you're finding that you can't get trucks to come into the state of California because they're not legal in the state of California. You can't get workers because of the policies they put into place that are basically suppressing the ability for people to go to work. If the federal government would simply step in and use their power and say, okay, all of these regulations you have in place are now on hold for the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever period of time that you say. You can reimpose them after we solve this problem. But they're all on hold right now. But they won't do that, and they just want to sit here and talk about how we have a problem and we're doing everything we can. Well, no, you're really not doing everything you can. You're actually exacerbating these problems.
Yeah, exactly right. And your point about the trucks is extremely important because the so-called Assembly Bill 5 that passed in the California legislature back in 2018 and went on the ballot in 2020 and got reformed by lots of people because they realized the damage it was doing to California independent contractors and those workers who, like Uber and Lyft drivers. Most people think about those types of jobs when they think about independent contractors. But the most important element of that, Steve, and you brought it up, is the truck drivers. They basically made it illegal for owner-operators to work in California, and more specifically, at the ports of California, at Long Beach and Los Angeles, where 40% of all of the imports in the United States, we're the largest importer in the world, 40% of all the imports come through those two ports. And yet in California right now, if you're an owner-operator of a truck, and that is, quote, the ultimate small businessman, he owns one truck or two trucks and hires a driver and decides where he's going and what loads he's going to pick up, and they had lots of work at the ports, bringing the containers off, putting it on a chassis, getting it to a warehouse, getting it to a railhead, getting it into the economy. I mean, but now under this AB 5 regulation that could be, to your point, set aside by Gavin Newsom, and certainly, Kamala Harris has lots of pull out in California, one would think, only, I guess she did get 1% in the Democrat, less than 1% in the Democratic Party. But the point is that regulation has driven something like 70,000 owner-operator truck drivers out of the state of California. They want nothing to do with it because the only thing that can happen now under AB 5 is that in order to do that work, you have to be an employee of a motor carrier. And Steve, here's the punchline: you can't unionize independent contractors, but you sure can unionize employees. So you figure out the politics of it, and those politics are basically costing us here in the United States on the supply chain issue.
It's just like a perfect storm here, and it all comes back to the same basic point, and that is these regulations and these policies that they put in place, assuming that they're doing good things, and really they're doing good things for one specific subset of the population, and they're just kowtowing to the unions here. There's nothing. Nothing's funnier to me than every time you hear a politician speak, they don't talk about jobs. They talk about good-paying union jobs. It's like it's in the style guide of every Democrat politician. It's got to be union jobs. You can't say the word jobs without including the word union.
Yeah, and there's nothing in under federal law or any state law that stops anyone from joining a union if they choose to do so, Steve. The question is, will they basically say that federal law is going to force workers to pay union dues to get or keep a job? That's the issue, and it's not about being anti-union. It's about being pro-forced unionism. Is what it's about for this for the Biden administration and for the top officials here in Washington D.C. If he was really pro-union, if he was pro-rank and file worker, he would reinstate the construction of the XL pipeline, which put literally thousands of union construction workers, operating engineers, welders, building trade people out of work the first week of his administration, even though the top union officials here in Washington endorsed Joe Biden and spent union dues and union money to elect him. And the first thing he does in 7 days is put all these union workers off the job. And he's done that in the energy sector to basically, to kowtow to a radical coalition in his Democrat caucus that wants us to basically say no more oil, gas, no more natural gas, and go what Pete Buttigieg, I think I pronounced that right, said everyone needs to go buy an electric car. I don't know if you looked at the sticker on electric cars, but my family, we can't afford an electric car. I know that for sure.
Yeah, the funny comment he made yesterday was, if you buy an electric car, you never have to worry about the price of fuel ever again. How are you going to charge up that electric car, sir?
Steve, yeah, I'll let you answer that question. It gets ridiculous after a while, doesn't it?
But again, it goes back to what I was saying before about all these policies being so schizophrenic. They're all in conflict with each other. They all want to stand there and give these pretty little speeches and make these pretty little proclamations. But when you look at the real world impacts of what they're causing and what they're doing here, it's hurting everything down the entire chain. And and again, they're all in conflict with each other. The unions leaders should be up in arms over what you were talking about as far as the Keystone Pipeline. But another side of that, too, is they've also shut down access to the Alaska oil fields. They've also pulled all the permits for all the fracking on public land. And then they turn around and go to other countries and beg them to ramp up production to offset what we have basically cut ourselves. And the other countries are going, no, we're good, thanks. We appreciate you cutting off your supply. So, and then they tap the strategic oil reserve. Like somehow that oil is different than the oil that we were pulling out of the ground and running through the pipelines. It's all feel-good politics. It's all, just win the news cycle for the day, I guess, and appease whatever specific noisy private interest or public interest or whatever you want to call it is making noise today. And they don't realize that the total sum of all of these policies are creating these very problems that they say they have no control over.
Yeah, exactly. And interesting enough, on the East Coast, we talk about the supply chain on the West Coast in Los Angeles and Long Beach, but on the East Coast, there's a brand new port. The first port that's open, the most efficient, newest port in America, is a port that was opened in Charleston, South Carolina, called the Hugh Leatherman Port. It can take the Supermax, those 16,000-plus container ships, because it's got a 52-foot water line. But right now, the International Longshoremen's Association, that union, has basically scared off all of these shippers from bringing any boat into that particular port because there's a dispute over who's going to run the cranes there, whether they be union or non-union jobs. I mean, Charleston has several ports. They have four ports, and this is the newest one. But they have a hybrid labor model where union officials run most of the stuff on the port grounds, but they have state employees that run the cranes that take these containers off. And needless to say, the moment the port opened and they were bringing one of the largest ships in the world in to unload containers and have a great big send-off and all that good stuff, the union files a lawsuit in New Jersey for $200 million against Hapag Lloyd, who's one of the largest oceanic shippers and container shippers in the world, and then another $100 million lawsuit against OOCL, which is another major shipper, saying if you go to that port, we're going to litigate. Right now, that port is running at about 15% efficiency when we have, quote, a supply chain. So what does Marty Walsh, the Secretary of Labor, he goes down there and, says, great work down here in Charleston, and he shows up there for a photo op, but yet the most efficient, newest port in America is functioning at 15% capacity when we've got a supply chain problem. And interestingly enough, Steve, one of the ships is sitting out in the harbor in Savannah, Georgia, that can't get unloaded. They actually sailed up to Charleston to fill up their ship with gas and then sailed back down to Savannah to basically get unloaded and sit there again because the union's threat of litigation on these companies is so dramatic they won't even go to the newest port, the biggest port, the most efficient port on the East Coast.
So, Mark, what can be done to resolve these issues?
Well, what you're doing right now is exposing them is very, very important. Obviously, the Biden administration is, I mean, to your point, and I've said it too, they're schizophrenic about all this, but we've got to make sure our legislators in both, in Connecticut's a little difficult, I know, but you got to continue to just get the word out about you're following these issues and you're understanding what's happening. And it's like Virginia just, 3-4 weeks ago, there was a dramatic change politically in Virginia because all of a sudden all of these policies started popping up on, moms in Loudoun County and small businesses in southeast Virginia. They made a change politically. That can happen. It can happen anywhere, frankly. And so your listeners and you and I need to keep telling these stories, keep getting them out there and having people pay attention. The only way we can, we change we the people, Steve, is we the people continue to be informed and involved, and that's where we got to go.
Yeah, I mean, we say it all the time. It's the only real opportunity you have to let your elected officials know what you're really thinking is at the ballot box. Because while they may throw out pretty little platitudes and make you try to make you believe that they care about you, they really don't. Because these issues can easily be resolved if they would simply focus on resolving the problem and not just appeasing their special interest. Mark, where can people learn more about the National Right to Work Committee?
Steve, they can find us on that amazing internet at www.nrtwc.org, nrtwc.org.
I don't believe the people who created the internet were unionized, were they?
Well, it was Al Gore, so he was definitely in favor of unions, I think, no question. Forced unionism, right?
Mark, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, sir. Hey, you have a great holiday, and we'll look forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.